Hello, and welcome to ARRI Tech Talk Live. My name is Zenia Lapo, and we are coming to you live from Burbank, California. Today, I have Los Angeles-based lighting designer and technical director, Andrew Schmedake, with me. And we're going to talk about one of the projects he's done in 2020, where he had to light and technical direct 6 different green screen setup in 6 locations of performers spread from Los Angeles to New York. I just want to remind everyone that you're welcome to submit your questions in the chat, and we will get back to you in the end of our talk in about 20-25 minutes. So I wanted to give an opportunity to Andrew to talk a little bit about his work and his background.
That's good. Hey folks, my name is Andrew Schmedake. I came into this business as a live events lighting designer. I started off by working in theater, concerts, things like that. And then with the COVID shutdown, my pivot's been largely to being a lighting designer and technical director for live stream at large events. One of those is with one of my longest running clients, Little Cinema, where we were asked back in April of 2020 to go ahead and create the red carpet experience or after party experience for the premiere of TNT's Snowpiercer. We would screen the episode and then have a similar after party to what you might experience walking into an actual in-person venue. We've got a brief little clip to show you about what that looked like.
Let's roll the first clip. And we'll just, in a second, we'll start talking about what are you seeing.
So what you're seeing right now is our virtual version of what might be a typical after-party event. We've got various different train cards following the conceit of Snowpiercer happening on a train. So you're able to navigate through that bar on the right side of the window to go through various experiences that correspond to what you might have experienced actually in a typical after-party event. We've got a cabaret, a bartender, a tarot reader, a DJ, an illusionist, all of which are different live and pre-recorded experiences that we controlled remotely with performers everywhere from Los Angeles to New York to Connecticut. Each of them is there in a mix of a hybrid virtual and real stage. They've got some physical props around them, but they're also in front of a green screen, all largely in their own homes, in their bedrooms or living rooms, performing live through a variety of OBS singers out to our proprietary website where we've screened the episode with DRM. So our challenge here was how do we go ahead and install, control, and coach our performers through how to live in a world of tech around them in the remote limitations required by the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, so how many setups did you have in total?
There were, I believe, 7 different train cars. Of them, I believe we had 4 live performances, and then we had an additional 3 pre-recorded ones. Those pre-recordeds were set up the exact same way as the live ones, just by virtue of the performance or the amount of space available. We had to pre-tape them for the benefit of the performers, but 4 of them wound up actually being completely live, with us running lighting remotely through the Miranda platform from Bent People's Industries to go ahead and correspond to and support the virtual backgrounds that were actually stills and of the sets in the Snowpiercer itself. So we're digitally inserting people into the actual stages of the series itself.
Yeah, so how big was your lighting team for a project like that?
So being very COVID conscious, the team was very small. Across the East Coast complement and the West Coast complement, there were 3 to 4 people. I led the West Coast side, driving a box truck all through Los Angeles, finding terrible parking spots, trying to go ahead and build a setup in people's bedrooms with some ARRI S60s, as well as I think a Sony PZW was our camcorder, laptops running OBS, plus a capture card, all things I'm sure we're familiar with in the current incarnation of remote production. But this was back in May, a month and a half into the pandemic, building that for the first time and learning how to put this all together. And then on the same side, I believe we had a team of 2 on the East Coast running the New York City and Connecticut installs.
Yeah, so can you describe your prep process and the timeline of how long did it take you?
Of course. So I got first told about this project. I happened to call with a friend of mine, Matt Hill, who said he's got something coming down the pipeline with Little Cinema. And my background with the organization had been largely their live events before they pivoted into this digital model. And he told me that they needed a lighting designer who could go ahead and light for a green screen to match 2 virtual backgrounds. Over the course of negotiating with vendors, putting together our package, I wound up being the one who knew the most about what was coming together as we sourced it from one local vendor. And when we realized it was going to reach a scope of equipment that it might have been too much for our performers to handle, I volunteered to be the one to drive that truck around Los Angeles and go ahead and put things together. So I quickly had to learn, all right, how does the Sony PZW work? How do I set up the microphones properly? How does capture card go into work? Because I acclimated from my background being purely in live events, only doing iMac on occasion, to being the one to actually engineer the system and put it together.
Yeah, so here we actually can see some of the behind the scenes. And so how many cues did you create for each performer?
That would vary based off the requirements of what environment they're in. Naturally, a bartender or an illusionist, for instance, only needs 1 to 2 looks, something that's going to align properly so that the talent looks similar to the environment they're inhabiting. Whereas something like the cabaret performance, trying to go ahead and recreate something that's a bit more theatrical and musicalized in nature, might have a variety of looks as we try and busk between the timbre and the emotional tenor of what a song might be. We've had a few different looks for those ones.
Yeah, actually, can we take a look at the four screen screen grabs? It's 2.9. Yeah, so can you please describe,
Of course. So you're seeing here a screenshot of the behind the scenes. This is how I was monitoring all of our live performances. Mind you, these are 7 different live streams happening at the same time, going to one website as you jump between different pages, as you might, for instance, on YouTube. And at the same time, you can see in the bottom right corner, me operating the Miranda interface, which is a web platform that's developed to go ahead and provide a DMX over IP solution. So you can see my 3 tabs for the 3 live locations I was trying to control, as well as a variety of cues. And as we move on to that next slide, you'll see what it takes to actually put these together. We were alpha testing the Miranda platform. Now it's gotten much more developed into the CineMiranda from Ben Peoples. And I had heard about it initially because he reached out to me in early April saying, hey, do you have a way to go ahead and use something that was originally an architectural controller? And we alpha tested and built our own JSON coded profile for the ARRI SkyPanel. And you can see here is how we tried to put things together. And mind you, this is very early on. This is actually us putting this in just raw DMX value. So if I wanted, for instance, to have my key light at 50% intensity, I'd say, okay, between 0 and 255, let's land you at 126. And then it would populate around 20 to 30 seconds later down the line as I'm watching the live feed. And I would go ahead and adjust and nudge values here and there to create the color mix and the intensity mix that we needed for these performers.
Yeah, so looking at this, interface, what kind of controls did you have over the lights?
The same you might have from actually being able to touch them on the back of the face panel. You've got color control. You can see I've got the color correction as well. I've got the individual diodes, red, green, blue, for instance. I prefer to use, I believe, mode 6 on the platform when I put them into a console. And being a live events designer, my preference is also to operate them as if they're DMX fixtures from my lighting console. So it felt natural to go ahead and look into the profile, identify what DMX values corresponded to which channels, and then program our own show from the ground up. Fortunately, I believe that now they've expanded CineMiranda, it's gotten a bit more robust. Being the alpha test on this one was a little bit of a learning curve for us.
Yeah, so what other equipment do you need to have for the setup, except for the fixtures, of course?
Ostensibly, you need to, of course, have your camera. You need to have a way to go ahead and get that camera into your broadcasting computer, the broadcasting device. That might be a virtual encoder like your laptop or OBS on there, or your vMix, or a physical encoder. And you'll likely also need to have a microphone and a way to capture audio. That's the most basic of it. But from at least the lighting standpoint, you also might want to work with something like the Miranda that I've just described, or for something that might be a little more simple, maybe you want to just have a local EOS Nomad or a laptop-based lighting controller locally there. We've used that in some applications, putting a Nomad on site with someone, then walking away and remoting into it to fire cues. But given the complexity and the number of different setups we had for Snowpiercer, we felt it was better to have all of our controls centralized into one website, as opposed to having, for instance, 7 different laptops in front of me, all remoting into a different device, hoping to goodness that remoting in through TeamViewer wouldn't compromise the quality of the stream. It felt a bit more stable to go ahead and have it all over a low impact, just IP over DMX over IP solution.
Yeah, so and how did you ensure the solid Ethernet connection, considering that all of the locations are in the houses, like just in the homes?
Honestly, you can't. If we are working in a remote solution where we're actually on domestic broadband, you've got to have faith, and you've also got to plan for a backup. But so at least on our performers side, we're limited by the requirements of what were they paying for. And of course, we paid to upgrade their broadband to the highest quality. I've also had to choose where there's performers who are on DSL and they have no chance to get broadband in time, so we've got to pivot them to a new location. On the control side, though, you, I think, have a due diligence to provide multiple options to ruggedize and make a more robust system design. So in this case, our first foray out into this virtual environment, I had control at my apartment here in Los Angeles, where I was running lighting cues for all the live events. And then I also had a complete concurrent backup with my assistant who would help me install everything at his apartment, able to remote into all those computers, as well as also able to fire cues as necessary. So for instance, if my power went out or my internet went down and we were off a UPS, we could immediately track into a backup at another offsite location as a way to go ahead and keep the show moving.
Wow. So now let's actually move and take a look at some behind the scenes because I would like to talk about the lighting green screen best practices, I guess. So can we go to like another one where we see 4 different lights? Because I would like Andrew to talk a little bit about the choice of fixtures and why did you decide to go with 4?
Of course. So here was our first foray into this, and also, admittedly, my first foray into lighting for a green screen from being a live lighting designer. But I knew at least that you needed to have separation from the subject to the green screen, make sure the fidelity of the color in the green screen was represented well on the camera, and that also my charge specifically was trying to find a way to light the talent in such a way that they look like they're authentically in the background. And so the first step in that is, of course, looking at what kind of backgrounds are going to be provided by your post-production or VFX team, and having those on site while you're lighting them, or in this case, it's a reference for me next to them. It was also beneficial that as the small crew that we had dictated, we were also the ones doing the chroma key, so we could simultaneously update the chroma key as well as the lighting to make sure that they were supporting one another while looking at the actual live composite in OBS while we were making our edits, and then admittedly remotely over TeamViewer. In the setup, you can see I've got an S60 over there in the upper left frame, which is lighting the screen. I've got an S30 throwing a very nasty shadow and highlight in the top right corner of the screen that we need to probably cut off at some point, just to providing a backlight for our subject. And then also 2 S30s, which are doing a key and a fill from off-axis, cross lights almost, to our talent. And the benefit to that, I think if we take a look at our cabaret performer, is that we're able to get saturated lighting on a talent without having that saturated lighting bleed into and compromise the fidelity of our green screens. The pink and the blue light here on Lena isn't going to make the green screen lose its effect, lose its ability to have a chroma key, because it's varying past the performer from the side as opposed to in the green screen, which is especially important when you're working in the close confines of a performer's home, for instance. In that living room setup you saw, there was a lot of real estate. In some of the performers' homes that we were in, there was virtually none. And so I'm sure that there's some photos out there where there's someone next to their bed, or there's someone, as in this case, yes, we've got a setup where someone is crammed in nearly on top of the green screen with lights shining on them simultaneously as well as on the screen itself. So we were careful trying to get them to scoot forward, avoid as much as we could in the way of shadows. But given the limitations of being in a space that might be 4x10 or 6x10, where you're barely able to even reach the full width of a green screen, you've got to go ahead and just wrap it around the corners and pin it down as best you can to pull out all the wrinkles in it. You've got to find a way to compromise in terms of what's actually on the screen, what's on your performers, and find the best way to, by trial and error, get the best product out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's actually see the rest of the bartender setup and the results of where it started and where it's going. So can you talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes?
So here's one I'm a bit less ashamed of. There's less wrinkles in the green screen, but you can see that we've got a light panel there providing light on the screen itself. We scooted that off a bit to avoid some of the highlighting there on the near shot, while also still providing backlight and rim light for our talent. And you'll also see the nature of what it is to build a performance space in someone's bedroom. All of Nick's lines are there on the side of his bed. In front of him is the laptop that's both doing the stream, but is also providing the feedback loop to the talent, from talent to perform to the audience, for instance. All of our talent was talking to people in the chat, providing engagement and calling them out by name to make it seem like they're authentically in a party environment, less so just watching a show online. But we're also able to see some of the benefits to the fact that we're able to work in post-production concurrently with a live stream. His bar was just a folding table with a black cloth, but if you look at the actual broadcast quality, he's inserted virtually into the actual Snowpiercer world. That foreground element is a bar from the set, but we're able to superimpose that as a layer on top of his chroma keyed actual camera feed to make it look like he's serving you bars from the world of Snowpiercer.
And this is basically the final image, a little bit lighter on the face. Wonderful. And so why did you decide to go with SkyPanels for this project?
There were 2 reasons for it. The primary one was that we wanted a fixture that we knew was cinema grade, that would be able to go and recreate some of the lush effects and world of Snowpiercer. And also we wanted a fixture that was going to be robust. I think one of the big things that we knew was that if we're going to set up an installation and then walk away from it and have no one able to service it except for the talent themselves, we wanted a name that had a reputation for quality and that also had a reputation for being able to create the color worlds that were going to align with what we had in mind for the post-production world.
So what features did you find the most helpful in for the remote control? Or what feature, what features did you use? Just the color range or any other?
By and large, the features that I was leaning on were mostly the color world. I come from the background where I want all of my pictures to be controlled from a lighting console. I don't want to set them up and walk away from them, which also helped this remote workflow to begin with, because we already had an idea of how to use centralized control and network everything together to one singular point of access for us to touch elsewhere. And so it's largely working in the color world, being able to dial in my color correction to be 55 Kelvin, 100 Kelvin if I needed to, or 4500, or up and down by 100 Kelvin, or getting into the saturated colors you saw there with some of the more theatricalized look like the cabaret.
You also mentioned that you originally you just set fixtures by yourself or by with one of your assistants, but then you were able to tweak some things remotely. So what was the flexibility of the tweaks you were able to make remotely versus being there next to the fixtures?
I think it's the nature of who's able to actually adjust and touch the things that are around you. So in this world where the only people nearby, once we'd set them up, was the performers themselves, you're competing with the directors as well as hair and makeup, as well as their actual time to perform. It's the performers who are making all the changes. And so it was all about instilling faith and trust and saying, hey, this is my name is Andrew. I'm here to walk you through how to make you look your best. Can you please tweak that light a little bit to the left, about 5 degrees? Can you go ahead and adjust this? We had one that had the wrong mode set up, and so I had to walk someone through on the SkyPanel itself how to change the mode to the one that we'd programmed for it. And to make this happen, we had an additional full setup of the rig in my living room where I could actually walk to where they were in space on a call with them and go, okay, here's me touching the fixture, showing you where to adjust it so that we can walk them through in the way to give them the most support and the most the most support they can.
Yeah, right. So did you run into any challenges, communicating with performers to do, the lighting, adjustments?
I think the same challenges that we've all run into in the virtual world. It's not something that a performer might necessarily be trained in or know about, but as long as you're able to streamline things and to make them as straightforward as possible in terms of how you plan and execute your remote performance, you're able to hopefully navigate it in a way that's going to be beneficial and not take up too much of their time while they try and prioritize their goal of giving the best performance.
I see. And, I'm also gathering that you've been working with director and VFX teams and performers. So how this collaboration worked for you?
The typical way, here's the challenge we run into all the time about production is there's only one voice allowed at a time on a Zoom call. And so you're only able to reasonably accomplish one thing at a time. That meant that at least for the rehearsal process that we had of roughly 2 to 4 days of it, it was more largely about the performances, and the tech naturally happened inside channels. So we'd be in Slack and I'd be talking to the VFX team going, okay, how about this background? How's this lighting look as we lit over the performances while the directors and the actors actually talk to one another. On top of that, we'd also just work iteratively. It would always be about, okay, let's do a trial and error. Here's a new asset, and I'll go and ingest that and remote into the computer and upload that. We were able to concurrently work together and keep on updating things on the lighting and side all the way through up till almost right before showtime on the day of the event.
Can you also summarize maybe some key things that you learned and some things that you would have done better next time? Not really understanding it, but let's see if you will get it. Who using for Lightroom independent of project and camera? Can you please clarify this question, because I'm not really clear on that. And there's also a request to see the sample footage. So can we roll maybe one more time our first clip so we can see how the performance look like for some people who just tuned in right now.
So once more, this is 7 concurrent live streams happening at the same time, navigated through this conceit of walking between train cars on Snowpiercer. You'll see here we've got the wonderful Jasper Argyle there crooning a little bit as he mixes drinks and calls out people in chat. We had a fun lesson here with how much green was in the apothecary's set in front of a green screen. A lesson well learned to move to blue screens in future whenever you're dealing with bartenders in Mint too.
Okay, so I think it should give a pretty good idea. And I have one more question. Were the live video keys being dropped over the background at each local site and then uploaded, or were the videos sent to one location to then be keyed and background edited?
This was all distributed across locations. So each location had their own laptop, in this case running an OBS, where we would do the chroma key locally. We'd remote in over TeamViewer, and then chroma key, and that would actually let me light while running the chroma key at the same time to try and find the best match between what green we're getting on the screen from our screen lights, as well as what we were doing with the SkyPanels to light talent to align them properly. So the chroma key was all distributed and then directly sent up through RTMP to the platform, which was then embedded into a variety of different URLs there.
A little follow-up question about what software did you use for streaming and compositing? I think you already answered the streaming, but for compositing?
Yep. OBS was the solution to go ahead and provide 7 different setups. We worked, I believe, with VER to get all the software preloaded onto the laptops, and then we were able to remote into a largely plug-and-play solution. So once the laptop was there and opened and hooked up to the Wi-Fi or largely hardline internet for every person, we were able to remote in and take that lift off of them to start streaming. We would just hop onto a call and let them know, all right, you'll be going live in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, what have you, and then they could take off and run from there.
I see. Okay, so how do you pull in this background assets?
Typically, they were pre-generated by our animation team. So we've got a variety of stills from the Snowpiercer team, very generous of them. And then our animation team went in to go ahead and add in little bits of life and detail to give them some animation. From there, they're downloaded to the computers locally, and then it's all distributed out to that sub point. So we had no central hub to go ahead and do the composite of the key. This was all very bare bones, May of 2020. Let's go ahead and find a way to put this together with the DIY aesthetic.
Yeah. So do you think the virtual events like that are here to stay even after the pandemic is over?
I do. I think that there's something visceral and important about being in person at an event. I think that's why you still sell tickets to Coachella. That's why people still go see Hamilton live. But at the same time, virtual events and distribution of content that we've learned about in the pandemic opens up a lot of doors that are very exciting for us in terms of who's able to see your work, the agency and inclusivity of who can be in your audiences. I mean, if we think about my background, the model of theater, who can go take up time on a Tuesday to go see a show for cheaper than paying more for Friday night tickets? Whereas I might be able to someone might be able to find a way to watch that show, even if they're not even geographically proximate to it. There's also a huge benefit to what we're able to do by actually bringing people in together remotely. One of the huge things that's probably here to stay forever is that remotes are no longer the domain of just a newscaster. Everyone can remote into anything they need to, which means that I've had projects where people are acting theatrical plays across the country from one another, in Los Angeles to New York, and they're able to actually be digitally composited into the same world. Or for instance, you can have someone who might be a guest on a talk show call in from wherever they'd like to be, because we've gotten so the idea of being able to communicate remotely is so ubiquitous to us these days. Okay, so one comment, this looked fantastic, great work. And one more question, yes. How was audio handled? Is the cabaret singer actually singing into a live mic that was mixed, or are all the performers on a lav mic? So it's a range of solutions. Our cabaret performer is actually a Tony winner and one of the stars of Snowpiercer, Lena Hall. So she, of course, was live singing the entire time. She had a Shure Super 5555, which I think you'll see in the image with her. That was actually her feed going into a USB interface that was then we remoted into and had our stream engineer, our audio engineer, who happens to be out in Hawaii, remotely mix it. So our team is across many time zones. On top of that, our other performers were largely working with shotgun mics, or in this case, you've got a setup where we had an MC on an SM58. And so it's a variety of options, but it's all about trying to go ahead and find the right kind of solution that'll plug right into your stream solution and code from there. Yeah, did you had any other projects similar to this one after the Snowpiercer? Of course. So Little Cinema called me up. I was driving around Los Angeles on Friday, picking up all the gear, getting ready to return it. And they said, hey, can you hold on to that for another 2 weeks? We've got 2 more just like this. And so this turned into a premiere for Anna Kendrick's Love Life, where we had a bartender and a DJ set up. And then it also turned into a premiere for Legendary on HBO Max, all following the same model. In the time since then, I've stuck with the company as a contractor, and we do a variety of different activations, not quite so much remotely, but still using the ideas we've learned from this to have remote hits for other events. We've most recently done premieres for The Alienist, Blumhouse, Tomorrow War, Without Remorse, a variety of them where we'll still use the remote workflows to have talent from the shows or interview guests come in and talk to us with our group actually working out of our studio here in Los Angeles. What are some of the alternative tools to CineMiranda out there that can be used for this application? I think it really depends on both the familiarity of whoever's going to be executing this locally, as well as how much time you've got to build into it. I mentioned earlier having just a laptop with a local lighting controller. In my case, I am familiar with the EOS platform, so I use Nomad, and being able to use TeamViewer to remote into that. TeamViewer, though, is very bandwidth intensive, so we try not to actually fire cues on someone's home internet because that bandwidth of seeing that video might compromise the quality of the stream. You could also be very DIY and down and dirty and have someone to go ahead and take some table lamps and put some scarves around it to color the way you might with gels. early on in the pandemic, I had a very low budget production of The Importance of Being Earnest, where there was no shipping, no lighting whatsoever, but beyond what people could find in their own homes. And I think it's all about how can you be ingenious in how you create things. I think there's no limit on that.
Okay, so I think that I went through all of the questions, and then I would say thank you everyone for tuning in today. And this video will be available live, and please feel free to send more questions and I will be forwarding them to Andrew. But I want to say thank you so much, Andrew, for coming to us today. It was a pleasure to talking to you about this amazing project.
Wonderful. Thank you folks for having me. Take care.